Hello and welcome to Monday's episode of Ticker Symbol Live. Today we're going to be talking about one of my favorite things in the world, 3D printing. 3D printing has a close place to my heart. I've been dealing with 3D printers for a very long time, and I think they hold a key piece of the future in manufacturing. I think they're going to be all over the place, everywhere from medical devices to industrial applications, high performance applications, certainly like jet engines, drones. And we're going to touch on that all because today was the most recent trading day where ARK Invest doubled their position in 3D systems. So that's what we'll be talking about today is ticker symbol DDD, which is 3D systems. So I'm going to jump right into it. Lots and lots to talk about today. Good morning. I hope everyone is ready for market open now in 1 hour as the series has moved to 8:30 in the morning Eastern. Adding the ARC reactor to my screen now, so hopefully you can see it in clear 1080p. I think I can even do this and have you see it now. So I have the ARC reactor organized by number, by percent change in shares, and we can see at the top with a staggering 115% increase in shares from the day before was 3D Systems, ticker symbol DDD. Otherwise, a pretty normal day for ARK Invest yesterday. The second most thing that they increased their position in was just cash. So this Morgan Stanley X9 USD is just the US dollar. And then they added, somewhere between 10 and 5% of a few positions. And they actually added less than 2% all the way down to exactly 0% for a lot of positions during the most recent trading days. They sold out very little. Pluristem, Nintendo, and Caterpillar, their three only sales for the previous trading day, which again was Friday at this point. And so not much news to talk about in terms of their position changes, except for their massive double down on 3D systems. So just a reminder, the way this ARC reactor works really quick. This is a heat map of all of their buys and sells. This is the Cathy indicator looking at how much cash-like positions they have in each of their accounts. And not much change anywhere across the board. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch right over to talking about 3D systems and 3D printing. And I'll stop for a second for questions. Lots of call outs to the 1-year anniversary of the market crash of 2020. That's right. So I think good days ahead, and hopefully most of the bad days are behind us. Let me just switch my screen to my pre-prepared browser and presentation here. So 3D printing, let's talk about it. 3D printing has always been one of the core pillars of ARK Invest. It sits right between artificial intelligence and robotics, and they have been pounding the table on 3D printing for years and years. It's been a big idea in 2017, 2018, 2019, 2020, and 2021. It is a mainstay of ARK Invest. They have 3D printing in 3 funds. They have it in ARKQ, they have it in the upcoming ARKX, they have it in ARKK, and they have a 3D printing index, PRNT. To say that ARK Invest is bullish on 3D printing is a massive understatement to both ARK Invest and 3D printing. So 3D printing, the reason it touches both robotics and artificial intelligence is because 3D printing is a form of robotics and it's a form of automation. So automated manufacturing, right? 3D design using artificial intelligence. So not just human-made designs, but getting, artificial intelligence to design and optimize parts that then get printed by a 3D printer is why it touches artificial intelligence. And 3D printers are most definitely robots, right? Which is why they touch robotics. 3D printing is used everywhere from aerospace, including reusable rockets, all the way to healthcare. If you didn't know this, almost 100% of all hearing aids are 3D printed today. So 3D printing is swallowing up important niche medical industries whole, right? When something like a hearing aid goes the way of the 3D printer, you can only imagine what's next. And that's a good starting point to talk about 3D systems, ticker symbol DDD. So one of the things I want to point out, so let me just increase the zoom here massively. 3D printing is very useful in the medical field, right? With a 3D model, doctors can plan a procedure with precision, reducing time and, importantly, surprises. So being able to 3D model a human or a part of a human, for example, a specific person's knee, and then being able to 3D print that knee outside of the body to plan a surgery using the model instead of doing an exploratory surgery on somebody's knee is massively important, both in terms of planning the surgery, but also in terms of helping a human, right? A lot of the damage that gets done during a surgery can be done during the exploratory phase, right? So with simple low-cost software models, surgeons can not only be more precise, but more productive. They can do a lot more of the planning and the actual design and implementation of the surgery before they actually start the surgery. And that's critically important. The other piece of this that's critically important is the ability to actually perfectly shape the thing you're putting into a human, for example, a knee replacement, to that human, right? So instead of having to shave off bone in real time to get things to fit inside a surgery, you can now model and print the exact replacement you want for that specific patient. So now you're causing less damage, you're reducing the element of surprise, and you're letting most of the planning happen before the surgery begins. So all three of those are exactly enabled by 3D printing. So the reason we're talking about 3D printing today is because of this. ARK Invest buys 3D systems based on their post-earnings dip, right? So they recently had their earnings. I believe they had a small miss to their earnings, and ARK Invest doubled their position as a result, right? And we'll talk about why that is in just a second. But in general, when a company misses earnings due to things like reinvesting in themselves or due to a big shift in leadership or things that ARK Invest sees as a long-term positive at the cost of being a short-term negative, that's one of the things that ARK Invest buys in heavily on because they have this 5-year time horizon, right? And that's why this channel and ticker symbol U are so focused on that vision of the futures, because at 5 years out, the future can be significantly different than it is today, even at 2 years out. The examples we've been using for that are things like cars and cell phones and drones, right? Think about the meaningful progress they've made in the last 2 years. And now think about the extent of that progress on an exponential curve that they'll see in the next 2 years. 3D printing, absolutely no different from those two spaces, right? So ARK Invest bought a huge dip in 3D systems, ticker symbol DDD. Here's that dip. Just want to show you what that dip actually looks like. So if we have a 5-year time horizon, we can look back 5 years and see that this stock has been trading largely sideways, slightly downward for the last 5 years. We know that there was, in case you didn't know, actually, there was a big 3D printing bubble in 2013 where everyone thought that everyone would have a 3D printer inside their house. So it turns out that 3D printing is not super useful in terms of, consumer grade printers, right? It's a hobby at best for consumers, but its real applications, again, are in industry, right? Healthcare, aviation, and so on, right? Industrial applications. And, again, all hearing aids, for example, medical devices are 3D printed today. So if we go back to this 5-year chart, you can see this bubble and then this bubble popping as a result of people not buying 3D printers for everyone's house, and then trading largely sideways and then downward. And then very recently, in the last couple weeks, there's a massive run up followed by a massive drop. So the stock we are looking at is currently 40% off of recent highs, which means if it hits a new all-time local high, right, if it comes back to its peak, you will make over a 50% gain. And that's what this channel is focused on, sniffing out these outsized buys and sells. You can see it's already changed direction here, right? So it's gained 30% in the last couple of trading days, and it's got much more room to run before hitting its all-time highs. So what the heck is this thing, right? That's what we should be at. Yep, I see a lot of skeptics in the chat. I'm a little skeptical. Totally. So let's talk about, the skeptic side, the bear case for 3D printing. But first, let's talk about the bull case for DDD specifically, right? So this is their investor presentation. Hopefully you can see it very clearly. If not, let me know and I can zoom in even more. And the thing I want to focus on a little bit is, we can do something like that. more. So DDD is undergoing a massive transition, right? They have a big change in leadership. They're dumping a lot of their non-critical assets, and they're doubling down on the things they specialize in and the things that have been working for them. So the key message here is they're reinvesting in their growth for the future, and they're fixing a lot of the things that they invested in the past, right? They have new leadership. That's an important note. Dr. Jeffrey Graves joined in May 2020, so recently new CEO, and a couple other members of their leadership team, I believe, have also been new in the recent year. So big shakeup at the top level, hopefully for the better, right? 3D printing is there to enable additive manufacturing in applications in growing markets. So one of the things that they've done is they're doubling down on places on the industries like we just talked about: aviation, healthcare, automation, automotive. So those types of industries are going to see outsized benefits from 3D printing as a result of a couple of things: weight reduction by using 3D printed parts and new architectures, as well as cost reductions associated with simplifying the process in doing in one machine what used to take many machines to do, and from reducing the part count of something. So instead of taking 800 parts, maybe it takes 20 3D printed parts. And as a result, there's just less points of failure, less maintenance, and less things that can go wrong in general. So, here's how they've been transforming. We're going to go by a lot of this, the finances, and we're going to focus on the application, right? So like I mentioned, healthcare and industrial, specifically in healthcare, dental, medical devices, simulations, and surgical planning. That's that end-to-end knee replacement I was just talking about, right? Being able to help doctors plan outside before the surgery instead of having a big exploratory process, right? You're moving some of that work outside of the exploratory phase of the surgery. And then in industrial solutions, aerospace, transportation, investment castings. One of my favorites, the most interesting one, is 3D printed jewelry and fashion. We're making a 3D printing video this week on ticker symbol U, and there are some funky applications of 3D printing, including 3D printed food. So stay tuned for that. That's going to be pretty cool. And then, of course, consumer durables and electronics. So think NNDM, which is able to print entire circuit boards using a single 3D printer. That is and used to be a multi-step, multi-material, multi-chemical process, right? And NNDM does it in one 3D printing machine. So they're doubling down on the applications where 3D printing has outsized benefits, and they're shedding applications where 3D printing is still heavily competing with traditional subtractive manufacturing, right? So they aim to be a full solution provider. All this means is they develop the hardware as well as the software, as well as the expertise that's used in consulting around 3D printing. So they're doing the hardware materials. They have service experts in each level. So for example, dental 3D printing service experts, knee replacements, jet engine parts, fuel injection nozzles, things like that. And then, of course, with knee replacements and any other kind of replacement comes the people who are most subject to those replacements. Who's a big demographic for joints? Besides athletes, it's going to be veterans. So they have a strong relationship with veterans and the Veteran Health Administration, right? So this is, I think, where things really start to get interesting. There's a few key use cases for 3D printing in general and for DDD specifically, right? In healthcare, it's things like orthopedics, it's things like bone replacements, it's things like hearing aids, right? So being able to do machine learning, right, to map these things to the individual. So an orthopedic that's customized and designed just for you used to be a multi-week, multi-month process, right? When you're trying to get something fitted to you, that takes a lot of intensive manual modeling, right? Using and leveraging artificial intelligence to do this and then feeding that model directly into one machine that can build it as one structural part, right? That can be as hollow or solid as you need and make like a lattice structure to make it as strong versus as brittle as you need. For example, to mimic a bone in both weight and structure, right? But with superior, ability to take impact, for example, now is being reduced to one machine, right? And that's really important. What used to be very, very challenging is now still a challenge, but now it's a challenge on the surgical side and not necessarily the design and implementation side, the design and, building side. So being able to economically have a viable path to implanting an orthopedic with an optimized surface and interior with superior mechanical properties for the same cost it used to cost for, metal rods before is a big deal. So that's one use case. The other use case is obviously going to be in aerospace. I'm thinking more like drones. There's going to be a lot of drones in the sky in the next 10 years. This case study is on jet engines, right? So there's a lot of parts in a jet engine. There's dozens and dozens and dozens of sub-assemblies per jet engine, right? Each sub-assembly. So the way you break a jet engine down, is there's the whole engine, and then there's all the subsystems that make that engine work together, right? And just that engine ends up being something like 800 parts, which sounds like a lot, but we're just talking about the core engine, not even like the manifold and all the things outside of that, right? So picture one jet engine on one wing of one airplane and realize that's a ton of subassemblies, subsystems working together to do one thing, inject fuel and spin really fast to move through the air, right? With 3D printers, you can take entire subassemblies and make them one part, which means they're lighter, they're stronger, they have less points of failure, and they're much more efficient at burning fuel because of their lack of weight, right? So one key metric for jet engines is if you can reduce the weight of something by 5%, you can reduce its contribution to the fuel burn by up to 20%. It's not linear. So if you can make a whole plane lighter by 5%, you can reduce the amount of fuel it burns for every minute in the sky by 20%. It's a huge deal because jet fuel is where a lot of airplanes lose a lot of their margin, right? So going back to the investor presentation, what you're seeing here is holistic solutions with materials, hardware, and software tuned by application experts, right? So human in the loop, double checking the designs, making sure they fit and are correct for the application to solve this massive challenge of complexity, material breakdown, fuel burn. All of these really tough engineering solutions are now being taken account into the design of this one part and then popped out by this one 3D printer, which again used to be a whole subassembly, an entire machine shop dedicated to it, multiple machinists with multiple different tools, multi-step process, so on, right? And of course, all of this is affecting their bottom line. We can see a dip in industrials here over the last year-over-year industrials. This shouldn't come as a surprise to anyone. Aviation and automotive are two of the biggest hit industries during the virus, right? So 3D printing has been hit year over year with new things that have kept it from hitting prime time, right? So whether it's the Chinese industrial recession, right, when their production kind of went down, when the dollar got stronger and people wanted to spend less money on inshore applications and they outsourced due to cheaper labor costs overseas. That was a hit against adopting 3D printing because 3D printing was competing with now cheaper labor, right? When the coronavirus hit, now 3D printing, its two biggest applications, transportation and aviation, took kind of a nosedive, right? People spent less time in cars for sure. People spent less time in planes for sure, right? So 3D printing has been kind of bearing the brunt of, thing after thing happening in the industrial space. And as a result, it hasn't been able to hit its prime time. But maybe now is a great time to buy because the things that are stopping 3D printing are not a result of 3D printing. The technology, the software, the artificial intelligence is still getting better and better, right? Nike and Adidas are 3D printing shoes today, right? With their smart knit shoe applications, right? So I think the clock is running out for reasons not to invest in 3D printing, especially as more and more types of 3D printed applications come online, new medical devices, drones, and now aerospace applications like microsatellites, all of the things that are being enabled by lower launch costs in space, right? Reusable rockets, microsatellites, things like SpaceX, and the internet service is going to provide through Starlink, right? So I think now is a good time to start looking at PRNT, which is ARK Invest's 3D printing index, and we're going to see that its performance is going to be on the rise over the next half decade, unlike its sideways action over the last half decade. So that's my spiel on 3D printing. The last thing I'll say is we can look at the use cases specifically in 3D printing for healthcare, right? So we talked about modeling the individual to being able to custom fit the medical devices and implants to a specific person instead of a generic anatomical model. Medical device design and manufacturing. So again, being able to, this is a 3D printed model of a specific patient's bone, and being able to understand, the intricacies and the curves of that bone specifically to model and create castings for the surgery and plan the surgery ahead of time, maybe even practice the surgery ahead of time, which is, a great relief to doctors. Building full anatomical models, again, both in general, but of a specific patient for, any multi-surgery or chronic related procedures that you may have. And then, of course, medical simulation, right? Being able to have doctors train in simulations in virtual reality, augmented reality, and physical reality through the use of 3D models, which you can, toss, print out another one. Oops, I want to try this a different way using a different method. I'm just going to pop another model out and try it on the exact right patient's model, 5 different procedures and see which one I'm most comfortable with, right? So 3D printing molds for all sorts of applications, right? This is just medical. You can imagine the same thing when you're trying to make prototypes for jet engines, for new drones, for new pieces of a car engine, so on and so forth, right? So 3D printing offers this powerful step of bringing the power back to the people on the implementation side, right? Whether you're an engineer on an engine, whether you're a doctor performing a surgery, whether you're a maintenance worker on an aircraft, et cetera, et cetera. So let's take one more look at DDD stock, right? This is what I really want to focus on. So ARK bought this dip right here. They bought 115% more shares than they had. So they over doubled their position in 3D Systems. And 3D Systems is currently, from market open, it will be down still over 40% from its recent high, from its February 9th high, right? So if it touches that high, you will make over 50%. And I'm not saying it's going to, but I'm saying it's definitely switched direction here, and it's definitely on the up and up. And I'm a big fan of 3D printing, so I will be buying the stock on market open.